Let us share what the sacrament of matrimony meant to us on our wedding day. I'm a cradle Catholic, and I attended a Catholic college. On our wedding day, I believe that we must follow the Church's rules for a sacramental marriage, as Father told us. These rules to me were the promise of permanence. This wasn't any problem for me. I knew that Charlie was the only choice that I would make for my life's partner. On our wedding day, I knew about the promise of fidelity.
You have to speak in the microphone.
No, I'm good. Oh, that microphone. Okay. Sorry. The promise of fidelity. My Catholic upbringing had stressed fidelity. Finally, the promise to be open to having children. Again, this had been taught to me many times. Marriage in the Church meant being open to having children.
To me, on our wedding day, the sacrament of matrimony, and I say this in all seriousness with no levity, meant absolutely nothing to me. My parents didn't go to church. My dad went once a year. My parents sent myself and my two sisters to Sunday school, but they never went to church. Actually, my dad went once a year at Christmas and would sing off tune. I always was embarrassed by him singing, but I also felt good he was there with us. And when I became old enough, which was around 14, 15, I stopped going to church at all. And he confronted me one time. He was 6'4", 260 pounds. And I'll never forget looking down at me, he said, "Why aren't you going to church?" And I looked up, I said, "You don't go, why should I go?" And then he put his head down, he said, "Well, I say my prayers." And I said, meanly, "Well, I'll say my prayers too." So when we were in that church, I know we met with one guy one priest for about, I don't know,
Half hour. And he must have surely mentioned the sacrament of matrimony, I guess. But, you know, I was in a daze. I had never been in love before. If Marty had been a Buddhist, you know, it didn't matter. Muslim, you name it. I'm signing up. You know, the fact she loved me was just, you know, a miracle. So he must have said something, but I honestly had no clue what the sacrament of matrimony was. I did know a couple things about the Catholic Church, though. I knew that they wanted marriage to be forever, and I was a big fan of that because my parents had gone through a messy divorce, and if anyone that says there's such a thing as a wonderful amicable divorce, at least my parents, was not it. And then also I knew that they wanted you to have kids and that the kids needed to be raised in the Catholic Church. And I thought Catholic values were fine, so I thought that's okay too. The first time I ever stepped in the Catholic Church was the day we got married. I'd never been in there before. And I was scared out of my mind. My best man was Catholic, thank God. And this was a formal Full mass.
Full mass, you know, and yeah. In those days you had to go down and up and down and up, and I had no clue what was going on. So there's a picture of us leaving the wedding, and I'm going, oh God, it's over. So that was the deep meaning of the sacrament of matrimony.
On our wedding day, I saw the priest as the official rule maker of the church and also representing the government. His job was to see that we met all of the qualifications to be married.
And I had never known a priest. In fact, the first one I met was the guy we met with for, I don't know, half hour. To me, he just was a substitute for a justice of the peace, and he was there, I guess, to make things look legal.
You go.
So, going after that, things, you know, we had a rocky start because we'd only had literally 4 or 5 dates before we got married.
We do not recommend that.
But that's, living together was not a problem. We didn't even know each other. And we've got stories about that, but we're going to skip those. So we met, actually, as disillusioned as we ever were was on our honeymoon, but that, again, that's another story. So things started going pretty well. We served a year in VISTA, Volunteers in Service to America, as kind of domestic Peace Corps workers. Marty was incredibly capable. didn't do much. But got the idea that I also wanted to be kind of a public servant. So Marty was kind enough to put me through my master's degree in public administration. I was really lucky to get a darn good job. And so here we go. I didn't go to church with Marty because I thought, I'd be kind of a hypocrite if I went. I didn't believe it, so I'd just stay home and watch sports and sleep in and read the papers. And then we started our family, and our daughter Heidi was born. And Marty was going to breastfeed, and we were so excited. And for some reason, Heidi could not suck. So I remember Marty charged me with getting bottles and nipples and all that stuff to go home, and we took her home. But whatever was wrong stayed wrong. She would cry literally 18, 19 hours a day. And she was hungry. And so I remember sitting under this tree, and we had in a duplex, and listening to Heidi cry up in a room and fantasizing about going to, for some reason I was going to go to Northern California. I'm not sure why that was it, but I was going to make sure that Marty got checks and I supported the family. I had nothing to fall back on other than Marty's faith. So we took Heidi back to the hospital.
And she was diagnosed as having a feeding problem, and we sort of knew that. But so then we began the long and challenging process of feeding her with a spoon, which took us a lot of time, but we got her through that.
And it was kind of a miracle how she got diagnosed. The Holy Spirit was with her and with us many times along the way, and we'd love to share that with you sometime. But anyway, she started going to preschool when she was 3 months old, and the first one in Western Michigan, and that helped her to really kind of adapt much earlier than she would have. So, knowing I had nothing, I thought, God, there's got to be something more than this. And I knew it wasn't materialism because my parents had a lot of money, and that sure didn't help them. So I started to search for God. I don't know exactly that's what I was doing, but I started reading about world religions and Christianity, and saints. Two in particular inspired me were St. John Vianney, who's the patron saint of priests. Does anyone know why he is? Anyone know too much about John Vianney? Well, the reason why he inspired me was he was not very well educated. Everyone kept saying, you should never be a priest. You just don't have it. You got zero intelligence. But he had this unbelievable way about himself that people were drawn to him. And he would literally do confessions 10, 15 hours a day because of his goodness and holiness. And I said, that's not normal. There's something there. And then there's St. Joan of Arc. I mean, a young girl leads a revolution. So that was part of it. We had a great priest who came who was very life-giving. By that time I was going to church. And I don't know, I have no clue how I got it, and I didn't get struck down on the way to Damascus, but I somehow got faith. And for those of you who got it at one point or another and weren't just blessed with it from the beginning as Marty was, it's kind of an amazing thing to get faith. But ironically, with faith, we distance each other even more. By this time, we were living a life of married singles, and we were pretty darn disillusioned.
And as Charlie was saying, through the intervention of the Holy Spirit, our daughter was diagnosed with cerebral palsy at the age of 3 months. This early diagnosis, along with an amazing school for disabled preschoolers, enabled Heidi to begin adapting to her disability. Charlie and I grew closer as we tried to be strong for our daughter and help her health.